3, 2, 1.
And then down here, there's a super sport mode. Watch this. Get some really loud fake engine noise. We're in the famous Yangwang U8, and we're gonna do tank turn. And there's so many unique features here that we really don't have anywhere in the US.
Welcome to sunny mainland China. No, I'm joking, of course. Look at the rain. The heavens have well and truly opened, but we are here at a vehicle testing proving ground facility to drive some Chinese EVs. It's a very, very exciting thing that we're doing despite this ungodly rain. We were invited out by our friends at DCar, China's most popular automotive news platform, to their annual summer test, where we could do something that not a lot of American journalists have done: drive some Chinese-made EVs. And look, here's the deal. We are excited about this. I think we all know that China has made some great strides in automotive tech and production in recent years, and we were keen to find out what's going on. So, in this series of films and articles, you are invited to come on a journey with us as we learn about, get to critique, question, and crucially drive a whole lot of Chinese-made EVs. And let me introduce you now to the cars that we have on offer. We'll start here, of course, the Porsche Carrera, the 992 generation. You know this car, we know this car. Why is it here? Well, because it offers a spectacular benchmark of dynamic performance, especially in the rain. We can use this to test all of the other cars by comparison. So that's why this is here. This 3-litre Carrera has 379 horsepower and 331 pound-feet of torque. Not massive numbers, but as we all know, with Porsche it's not the power on offer so much as how the car puts it down. The 911 sets the benchmark by which all others will be judged, especially this next car. You know the Porsche, but have you ever met the MG Cyberster? No, neither had I. It's kind of comparative to the Porsche, right? 2-seater sports car, it's got 544 horsepower. However, this thing is a porker. It weighs some 4,376 pounds. That is surely going to affect performance. We'll be interested to see how this guy handles the track. The Cyberster is produced by the state-owned manufacturer SAIC and is said to take visual inspiration from the NGB Roadster of the 1960s. You can have the Cyberster with either a 64 or a 77 kilowatt-hour battery, in either rear-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and with either 310, 335, or, as with this one, 544 horsepower. The most impressive thing is probably the price, which comes in at the equivalent of $50,372 US. That Porsche we just looked at, $181,720. Yeah. Next up we have the Avatr 12. This is kind of a sports saloon, maybe like a Model S type thing. It's good looking, doesn't have a rear window, kind of similar to the Polestar, and kind of futuristic inside. It's got a kind of like a square steering wheel. It's nice, I like it. And then if you follow me down, next we have the Li Auto L6, kind of a compact SUV, and this is actually a plug-in hybrid, which brings me on to quite an interesting thing about plug-in hybrids here in China. They're called plug-in hybrids, but they're not really plug-in hybrids in the way that we would know it, because the petrol engine, the gasoline engine, doesn't actually drive the wheels. It just operates as a generator, generating electricity, feeding that into the battery, which in turn powers the EV motors, which drive the wheels. A more accurate name is EREV, or Extended Range Electric Vehicle. And to give you some context on that, the published range of this Max Edition L6 is 132 miles of pure electric range. But by factoring in the additional charge available through that range extender, the range estimate rockets up to 864 miles. Now, it's worth also saying here that these are CLTC Chinese range estimates, and they are spectacularly optimistic, even by the standards of the EPA range rating that we use here in the US. It's likely that the real-world range of a vehicle like this might be as little as 50% of that claimed range. Up next, we have the Xiaomi SU7, the SU7. This is one of the more interesting cars here. I'll tell you why. Remember when Apple, that famous upstart little cellular phone company, said, hey, we're going to make a car, and then they tried and tried and tried and then ultimately shelved the project? Well, Xiaomi is a cell phone company, kind of the Apple of China, and guess what? They've made an EV. And you know what? It's pretty good. It's got 673 horsepower, and people have drawn some similarities visually to the Porsche Taycan. Looks pretty good. Feels really nice to drive. This is a contender, I would say, for the best car here. It's certainly a Model 3 beater. We'll get onto that in a little bit. Produced in collaboration with the state-owned automotive company BAIC, the SU7 is available in 3 variants. SU7 and SU7 Pro work on 400-volt architecture, whereas this SU7 Max runs on completely different 800-volt system. The DCar journalists who are assisting us on this trip told us that the SU7 is the first real performance EV to come out of China, a fact Xiaomi are very proud of. However, they did forget to finish adding traction control to the first few cars, which went out to journalists and influencers, and which, according to one source, resulted in some pretty out-of-control driving moments. Thankfully, the Xiaomi now comes with a beginner mode, which limits the power in the hopes of keeping you facing the right way. Next up, we have the Deepal G318. Now, Deepal is kind of like the bougie upscale version of the Chang'an brand, kind of how Yangwang is to BYD. So this is kind of like the slightly more fancy version. And this is interesting. This is kind of apparently the thing in China right now. These big, rugged, off-road capable looking SUVs. This is all the rage here in China at the moment. So this is the Deepal. This is another one of those plug-in hybrids, which is more of a generator into the battery system. Pretty cool, huh? The G318, after which this car is named, is in fact the highway connecting the east coast of China to Tibet. And fun fact, the Deepal features over a dozen drive modes, and this specific model is the upscale air suspension version. The infrastructure in rural China is still in development, and so rugged-looking vehicles like the Deepal are a firm favourite for people in those areas, as it allows them to traverse the poor quality roads that they might come across. Up next we have the Lynk Co 08. This is a fascinating car. This is a joint venture between Geely and Volvo. Geely owns 78% of Volvo, and like with their other joint project, Polestar, this Lynk Co gives us an insight into how that partnership manifests. That includes sharing the CMA platform on which this car is based with the likes of the Volvo XC40, the Polestar 2, and as well as a dozen Geely and Lynk Co vehicles. It's got some very interesting design motifs. I like the headlights here and the stanchions where the side mirrors go. That's to an acquired taste, but it's interesting. So this has got 430 horsepower from the motors, 163 horsepower from the engines, so there's 590 total horsepower. Pretty good, nice looking, pretty nice on the inside. This is one of those cars that you could see very easily coming to a foreign market. I'll be interested to see how this performs. Up next, the Volkswagen ID.7, a car you may not be familiar with, but you soon will be, because this is going to be sold in America. Now, power-wise, it doesn't have anything worth writing home about. However, this is coming for the Model 3. This is going to be your chief Model 3 competitor in the US when we start to see them arrive in the 3rd and 4th quarter of this year. So it's fascinating that we have one here. We get to compare it not only to the Model 3, but also to some of these Chinese EVs. We get to really get a good lay of the land. That's going to be fascinating. Interestingly, Volkswagen just released details of the ID.7s bound for the US, and surprise, surprise, the US market 7s are getting a lot more power. 282 horsepower and 402 pound-feet of torque, up from 201 horsepower and 229 pound-foot of torque for this Chinese model. For context, the 2024 Model 3 rear-wheel drive standard range has 257 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque. Up next, my favorite car here, the Yangwang U8. Now, Yangwang is kind of the luxury subsidiary of BYD, and this is their most outrageous, biggest, most bombastic, exciting vehicle. It's got 1,197 horsepower. This thing can do tank turns. Yeah, that's right, 360-degree tank turns. This thing is an animal, and on the inside, it's pure luxury. I really mean it. It's very luxurious, really nice to drive. This thing's cool. I could see this in America, couldn't you? As well as tank turns, the U8 also boasts up to 55 inches of wade height and even, get this, yachting mode, where the 2-litre turbocharged gasoline range-extending combustion engine shuts down, the windows lock shut, the sunroof opens, and you can float fully for up to 30 minutes. The wheels will even gently rotate and turn, to propel you along at up to 1.8 miles per hour. Imagine that at your local lake on the 4th of July weekend. Up next, we have the BYD Han. Now, this is kind of like a Model S competitor. Again, it's a plug-in hybrid, kind of a, legacy car on the inside. It feels more like a car that we're familiar with. It kind of feels like the interior is quite GM. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I don't really mean it in a good way either. It's an interesting car. BYD is a growing company, and they've got a lot of different cars for a lot of different market subsects. So, yeah, the BYD Han, there you have it. This 2024 Glory Edition has 570 horsepower and 516 pound-feet of torque and comes in at just $34,972 US. Here's your big Model Y rival from China, the XPeng G6. Now, this is an 800-volt architecture electric car. It's nice and roomy on the inside, looks good on the outside, and guess what? Volkswagen liked this car so much that they actually decided to buy 5% equity in XPeng. So, you're onto a good thing when that happens. 296 horsepower, 325 pound-feet of torque. Couldn't you see this in America? I certainly could. At just $35,686 US, this all-electric rear-wheel drive ultra-long endurance max edition of the G6 has a claimed CLTC range of 469 miles. And whilst it almost certainly won't hit that number, it's worth saying that the equivalent single-motor Model Y's CLTC range is 344 miles. So, even if the G6 is shy of its range target by a quarter, it'll still be comparable to the Model Y. One of the most interesting cars without doubt here is this, the Nio ET5. Absolute pure Model 3 competitor, but with an edge, because Nio offers battery swapping. Yes, that's right, that thing that Tesla have been promising but never actually deliver. This car can do it. You drive into a little self-service checkout area, it backs it in automatically, the car raises up, the battery is withdrawn, and within 5 minutes, a fresh 100% charged battery is put into your car and you are out of there. That is amazing technology. Nio are absolutely crushing it here in the Chinese market. If any car could come for the Model 3, I think it could be this. In another shrewd move, which is not unlike Tesla's supercharger network long play, Nio have set up what they call power journey routes. These are roads which go from major cities in China to touristic hotspots such as the Great Wall, on which Nio has increased the frequency of their charging and battery swap facilities along, in anticipation of the higher EV traffic. Up next, we have the GU01. This car shares a platform with the Polestar 4, and there's actually an interesting little tidbit that we've learned during our time here. Obviously, we all know that Polestar is a division of Volvo, owned by Geely. There's a lot of part share, platform share going on. Well, interestingly, it seems from what we can tell, the Polestar and Volvo aren't getting the most recent chassis and things like that, parts. Those are going to EV brands from China, such as this. The other interesting thing about this car is it's got what they describe as the RoboCar self-parking system. It's voice-activated parking. While the majority of vehicles we've seen today operate their various levels of ADAS and autonomous driving using a mixture of LiDAR and cameras, the GU only uses cameras like Tesla. With this system, they claim to have near level 4 autonomy. Now, we weren't able to verify that, but it's worth noting that almost all of these cars have some form of autonomous driving feature, something which is very clearly important to the Chinese market. Up next, we have the Zeekr 007, as I'm sure they'd like me to call it. This is a rear-wheel drive Model 3 competitor with 422 horsepower. Good looking, kind of like a baby Lucid, right? I like it. Zeekr is another Geely-owned brand, and this 007 claims to have a super fast 500 kilowatt charging capability, though we never saw that in action, so we can't verify. Ah, yes. Another one of our editor's favorites is the Baojun Cloud, the Cloud car. Yeah, this is kind of your little city car, quirky design, really nice functional but comfortable interior. Pretty cool, right? The most affordable of all the EVs we tested, this fully loaded Hyundai comes in at just $17,612 US with 136 horsepower and 148 pound-feet of torque. It's not going to win any races, however, with 286 published miles of range, it's a perfectly adequate city car for half the price of the cheapest Model 3 you can buy in the US. Next up, we have the Aito M9. This full-size luxury six-seater is a collaboration between the automaker Carrera and the technology company Huawei. Huawei are one of the big players here in the kind of Apple CarPlay type space, the user interface of cars like this. This one has got some really nifty tricks on the inside. The other big focus from Chinese automakers for their domestic market comes in the form of the interiors, which takes precedent over everything else, including how a car drives. Comfort, luxury and convenience are essential for the prospective buyer, with our friends at DCar telling us that most people want to get into their car, turn on their car's version of autonomous driving and relax as they're taken to their destination in comfort. Because of this, all of these cars have infotainment systems, the likes of which we in the West aren't really exposed to, with almost all of the cars here featuring some form of AI voice-activated assistant, as well as games and things like karaoke and messaging services. Having such extensive experience in the field of operating systems, many of the cars on the Chinese market license their OS from Huawei, kind of like Apple CarPlay here in the States. Next, the cheapest car here, the Cherry iCar. What do we like about the iCar? Well, pretty much everything. This car costs nothing and delivers everything. It's so good to look at, it's fun to drive, it's functional. This is, without a doubt, we think the car that if it came to the American market, it would do the best. We really, really like this car. The one you see here comes fully loaded at $23,772 US, with the long-range battery and all-wheel drive. Still, a $23,000 Jeep competitor. Sign me up. And then we have this absolute beauty. This is the Volvo EM90, super duper luxurious, $100,000+ luxury electric minivan. This is the coolest car here, right? Surely. Why do we not have this in the States? This is your kind of like Mercedes E-Vito type competitor. It's very cool. The most luxurious ride I've ever felt. I really like it. And finally, basically the car that everyone here is trying to beat, the Tesla Model 3 all-wheel drive, long range. This is, as we would know it, the Highland, the revised Model 3, the new Model 3. This is the one we're all trying to take down. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to drive all of these cars. There are going to be articles and photographs on every single one of these vehicles. We're going to test them all, and we're also going to compare them all. We've got a 5-car comparison against this Tesla here. We're going to compare the Porsche and the MG, and we're going to compare the two cheap city cars. This is a fascinating experience. We're really happy to be a part of it. You've got questions about Chinese EVs, so do we. So let's jump in. Let's do this.